Hey guys, Mr. Z and Mr. Z on TV, and today we're going to talk about something that everybody always sort of accused me of, and that is that I have completely flipped. And yeah, today we are starting our first flipped lesson, which means you're going to watch this on your own, and as you can watch it as many times as you want, and then in class we're going to do the homework, kind of coaching, stuff like that, and then you're going to conference with me as far as how you did on this. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to talk about circulation, or our cardiovascular system, today. And so let's look at what you need to know for your verbal quiz with me. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, the facts, man. Here's the deal. You need to know what the basic functions of the systems of the body are, especially the one we're talking about, the circulatory system. And inside of that, we have the heart, okay? Basic organ. It's a pump. I think everybody knew that. It pumps blood. Not a big shocker there. So as far as that goes, there are three types of vessels. Now, a vessel is like a tube that carries the blood around the body. You need to know what they are, how they're a little bit different from each other, and what they do. Okay, so then the blood. As the blood flows around, blood has four parts. Each part of the blood has a little bit different job that it performs. And then you want to be able to diagram, explain whatever, the path of blood as it flows through the body and uses the heart as the power to do that. So where does it go first, and what's the order and stuff like that? All right, so here are the basic functions. Inside the body, our circulatory system is all about carrying needed materials to cells, okay? Cells are the parts of the body that do stuff, and so it has to carry needed stuff there, and it has to pick up waste. The last thing that it does is it fights infection, and that's kind of part of the immune system and circulatory system, but we're going to find out the circulatory system tends to unite the other systems. All right, so it's delivering stuff and it's picking stuff up. And we're going to use kind of an illustration of a factory here, where if you've ever been around a factory, maybe not in the part of town you live in, but there's always trucks or trains or whatever coming in to drop off the raw materials that they're going to use to make their product. And then once they're done making their product, they have wastes, and those wastes might be just simple garbage, or they might be things that are a little bit worse than that needed to be treated or whatever somewhere else. So those get carried away as well. And the roads that do that are kind of like our blood vessels. So there's big highways that you might take, and then the highway splits off into a road, and then that road goes down to a driveway, all right? And then the same thing, the driveway comes back out to the road, and back on the highway the truck goes with its waste. So those are the two things. Now, those are done by special vessels that we're going to talk about next. The bottom one, the fighting infection, is done by a special cell in the blood. Okay, so here's kind of a diagram, image, whatever you want to call it, of a typical cell. That's in the middle, all right? And so if we take a look, I'll try to use my laser pointer here. Okay, this is the cell, big outer cell here. And then this is actually a red blood cell that they've got near it. Okay, it's not inside, it's just nearby. And then these little guys look like little ping pong balls scattered around. Those are oxygen molecules. So one of the needed materials that blood carries is oxygen. Huge. Oxygen helps us release energy in our food. Kind of like, you know, if you're going to burn a piece of paper, if there's no oxygen around it, it's not going to burn. Well, that's because that reaction, burning, is releasing energy just like our cells do. Okay, so that's one. The other one is the energy itself, which is sugar and all the stuff that comes from our digestive system. Like we just learned, you know, the small intestine, large intestine are absorbing stuff. And so those nutrients, the carbohydrates, the fats, and proteins, once they've been broken down, and the water, those things go into the bloodstream. Well, the reason is because they got to go to the cell. So they're headed over to the cell. And this guy right here is going to be our cell, and this guy, whoops, that is not the guy. The red blood cell right there is going to carry it. So one of those needed materials happens to be our oxygen, the other one would be sugar. So it's carrying those to the cell, they get transported through the cell membrane, and then the cell uses them, and then they get carried away by the same vessel, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so one of the other things the blood does, after it goes to the cell to deliver the oxygen and the sugar and all the other stuff that the cell needs to carry on its normal, routine, the cell has some waste products, and those waste products have to go somewhere, so they go back into the bloodstream. So Normally what happens is when they go back into the bloodstream, they go into a vein. Now, I'm going to show you in the kidney here. We'll zoom this out. I don't care if I cover some stuff up here. So you can see, and right here, this little guy right here would be an artery that's coming in from a larger artery out here, and that feeds into the kidney. Now up here, that's your adrenal gland. We won't get into that, so that's your adrenal artery, and that's kind of how they get their names. But your kidney is over here, this big thing, okay? So the blood comes into the kidney like this, and it follows these different artery paths, and it gets filtered by the kidney, and those wastes that were produced by our cell, which is still showing a little bit over here, those get filtered out, and they drain down this way, and we'll talk about all that stuff later. But after the blood gets cleaned by the kidney and all that waste goes away, just like a cell could fit in like where this kidney is, after the blood goes in and drops off what it's supposed to, in this case the kidney takes the waste, the blood goes back out. Well, and then it goes back out through the vein, which is colored blue because normally after blood feeds something, the oxygen is gone and the hemoglobin portion of the blood turns back to blue. Okay, so arteries and veins are two of the important ones, but what's in the middle? Well, I'll shrink that down just for a second. If you look in the middle of the kidney, the arteries and veins, you can't really tell, but they turn into each other. An artery and a vein are connected through what's called a capillary. Now, let me build this guy over here. This is what would be normal in an artery. See how the red blood cells are free to move around and they've got lots of room, and that's because arteries are big. But when they get to being in a capillary, which is the other one we're going to talk about, they don't have quite as much room. Alright, so arteries, veins, and capillaries. The one I just showed you, a little bit different sort of view of this guy. This is a cross-section of an artery, and you can see there are a lot of different particles inside of here. Okay, we have red blood cells, we have white blood cells, and I don't see any platelets, but they'd be in there. Okay, platelets, maybe these guys right here are what they're trying to represent with platelets. But if you notice the wall, okay, look over here, maybe I'll pull out an arrow for you. If you look at the wall of the artery, it's thick, and it actually has some smooth muscle in there, and that's because every time the heart beats, it's under a lot of pressure, and it has to, resist that pressure. That's what blood pressure is. But the particles in there, okay, can move kind of freely around, and they can flow through the artery with no problem. So that's generally the point of an artery, and the arteries carry usually blood, oxygen-rich blood, unless they're going to the lungs to get it. So we'll shrink that guy down. Okay, that's an artery. And arteries, I showed you this one a second ago, they've got the room to move, okay? So not a big deal. Veins look a lot like that, except the wall that I showed you up above, and this guy right here, the wall of the artery in a vein, because it's not an artery, is much thinner. It doesn't have the pressure to deal with, and that's how we can tell the difference. The walls are thinner. This is a capillary. Okay, now, in a capillary, notice, first off, that the blood cells are almost in a single file line as they move through here. That's because capillaries are really small, and it's where things in the blood, like oxygen and sugar, leave to go into the tissues around it, and things like waste and carbon dioxide come into the capillaries. So they're kind of like driveways, It's where a UPS truck would pull into your driveway to make a delivery or a pickup. That's what capillaries are all about. Okay, so then that leads me to the blood itself. You can see a picture of an illustration of the blood, and there's 3 of the 4 parts we can see here, and we're going to talk about those a little bit later on, but I'll just draw your attention to them. This is a white blood cell, okay? This is a red blood cell, and then this little guy right here, weird creepy looking thing, is a platelet, and those are kind of cell fragments, and we'll talk about what they do in a second. Okay, so the big deal is after we understand the vessels, so we have, that's an artery, okay, these are veins, and how we know that is the direction of blood flow. We call arteries and veins, and this one's kind of weird that I've pointed to here. Arteries are things that take blood away from the heart. Well, in fact, this guy right here is an artery. So you might be asking, why is it blue? Well, it's blue because as it comes out of the right ventricle, okay, blood flows out of the heart. That's why we call it an artery. Artery away, you can remember that, the two A's. Artery away, and veins return. Well, this would be a vein right here because the blood's going to flow down and into the atrium, ventricle, artery, vein. Atrium, ventricle, artery, vein. And we're going to hear that over and over and over, AV, AV, AV. So why is this a vein then? Well, because, actually it's not a vein, but why is it blue? It's blue because the blood in it doesn't have a lot of oxygen. It's on its way to the lungs. So this is the pulmonary artery right there. And it's an artery because it's thick-walled and it goes away from the heart, but it's more like a vein in that the blood inside doesn't have oxygen. Now that's going to come back through the pulmonary vein, which is right here, and they've colored it red, and you can see that that opens right there into the left atrium, and then the blood flows to the left ventricle, and then from there it's going to go right up through this valve and follow me behind here to the aorta and all over to the body. So follow the arrow here. Here's what happens. Blood comes into the heart through a vein to the right atrium. Now it's on the left because, you know, it's like if you're facing somebody, their right is your left. So this is the right atrium. It's going to drop down to the right ventricle, and the right ventricle is going to push it out to the lungs. Now the lungs will be out here somewhere. It goes out there, comes back to the left atrium, left ventricle, and then it goes all the way out to the body. So the way that I typically tell students to remember this is the blood flows top down, bottom out. So it goes from the atrium to the ventricle, top down, and then bottom out. And then always remember AV, AV. So it goes atrium, ventricle, artery to the lungs, vein comes back, okay? Atrium, ventricle, artery, vein. Then once it's back, atrium, ventricle, artery, and then it's going to go to the body and then come back to the vein, and then atrium, ventricle, artery, vein, atrium, ventricle, artery, vein. So AV, AV, AV. Another one is top down, bottom out, or right side, atrium, ventricle, lungs, atrium, ventricle, body. So right lungs, left body, AV, top down, bottom out. All those things will help you remember the flow of blood through the heart. Okay, the last one has to do with this little guy right here, and that is a white blood cell. And what they do is they recognize things that shouldn't be in the body, and then they kill it. So that's part of the immune system we will talk about later. But first, let me move this guy around a little bit. Whoops, I got a couple things there. And this is the blood. So I was just talking about those parts of the blood. And the blood has red blood cells, which we have right here. Whoops, red blood cells. Red blood cells, when you spin blood, it separates. That's what this test tube is. We have red blood cells at the bottom. We have white blood cells and platelets because they're smaller. Okay, they fit right here. And then what's this? This liquid is called plasma. Well, the red blood cells carry oxygen. The white blood cells fight disease. That's these guys right there. The platelets help us seal our cuts and heal. And then the plasma carries all the nutrients and carbon dioxide and water and things that will not be bonded to by the red blood cells. So all our vitamins and nutrients and stuff, that's where they go in the plasma. So blood has 4 parts: plasma, white blood cells and platelets, and red blood cells.